Bienvenue tout le monde. Je suis tellement contente d'être ici parce que j'ai vécu ici dans mon adolescence. So I grew up in Montreal, so I'm thrilled to be back here. I shouldn't be so I hope you love it as much as I do. It's a real homecoming for me to come here. So I'm Nicola Ranson. I'm a somatic psychotherapist and a licensed clinical social worker, and I specialize in trauma. And my lived experience of cult was my 10 years in the Osho Rajneesh cult. So this is I at 24, being initiated in India. And I lived in the communes that were right here in Montreal, Vancouver, and also in Rajneeshpuram in Oregon. So my memoir about those 10 years is a slice of orange, loving and leaving the Osho Rajneesh cult. And that will be out next year, thanks to unsolicited press. So my background was in drama therapy and massage. So when I started to study psychotherapy, I just wondered, where had the body gone? It just seemed to have disappeared, and everything took place from the head down, top down. And that changed for me after I discovered Dr. Peter Levine's work. So Dr. Peter Levine has a model called somatic experiencing, and he has doctorates in medical biophysics and psychology. And his approach is based on his studies of animals in the wild. He found that animals in the wild suffered far less from trauma symptoms than animals in captivity. And he theorized that maybe there were ways that humans could access our innate survival capacity to help us recover from trauma. So I've used this approach for 23 years, and it's been an enormous benefit to me personally and professionally, and it's very much the lens through which I see things. So my knowledge of cults was supplemented by teaching social psychology. I taught in marriage and family therapy and counseling psychology for some 19 years at National University. So social psychology and study of groups' behaviors I found incredibly helpful. And I also want to give credit to my clients who have taught me so much. I've had clients from a wide variety of cults, and it fascinates me how there are so many commonalities. Like you can have deeply conservative, purity-oriented cults. You can have sexually permissive cults like mine. And yet the tactics that have induced us into the cults is so similar. I mean, it's the same playbook. And also the recovery is incredibly similar. So that really tends to fascinate me. So I presume there are a lot of cult survivors in the room. And how many are cult survivors, or how many are therapists or in the healing profession of some kind? Oh my God, it's the whole room. And how many of us are cult survivors and therapists? A lot. And how many are already practicing somatic psychotherapy? 8. Well, I plan to take some time at the end to come for questions, and hope it works out that way. If not, I'm around for the next few days. So my plan today is really to give just the teensiest taste in this short time frame of somatic psychotherapy and share some benefits and cautions around using it in cult recovery. So what is somatic psychotherapy? Well, soma is the Greek word for body. So essentially, it's practices, healing practices that center the body. And I want to make sure, we respect that this is not a new thing. Sorry, no problem. So the body's been used in healing practices for millennia in various indigenous cultures. Come on in. And currently, of course, we have all kinds of therapies: dance therapy, drama therapy, there's yoga. And in the field of psychotherapy itself, we've got Reichian therapy, Gestalt, psychodrama. I mean, there's so many different approaches that come from somatic psychotherapy. So what do they all have in common? I think it's really an appreciation of the wisdom inherent in our bodies. The understanding that the body is a repository of information. And there's the term that Eugene Gendlin coined, feltsense, that's the way we access this information within us. It's also gut sense or interoception or innate non-cognitive knowing, just the sensing into the wisdom in our body. In other words, our bodies know more about people, about situations, and ourselves than we're explicitly aware of. Bottom up, not top down. So I want to invite you to take a moment, and I'll be doing this a few times, and please know that this is an invitation because we're trusting our bodies. So if you don't want to do this, don't do it. And the invitation is just to take a moment and sink into your body. So feeling your body in its seat in this room and sensing in what you're perceiving in a way that's not what you're thinking about yourself and about whatever's around you. What are you liking? What are you disliking? So that's your felt sense. And that's something we can all develop through mindful attention. So whatever somatic approach you use, if you get to experience that your capacity to feel better is inherent inside your body, that's essentially empowering. And empowerment, anchored in ourselves, in our bodies, is the opposite of indoctrination. So what cults do is they rob us of agency. And agency is the source of action, the source of decision-making, even of meaning itself. It gets externalized and attributed somewhere out there, whether to the leader or to the philosophy, anywhere other than within you. So the opposite is the discovery that well-being and the path to get there is located physically within us. So why is that? Because we're wired for survival. We have these innate capacities, and we can discern between the sign of danger and safety. I mean, that's the basics of survival, and we know this system works because we're all here. So danger I've put in red, so we have this nice little continuum. Discomfort is obviously a very mild beginning of sensing something that you don't like, that's unpleasant, and we have an aversion to it. And the opposite is true of safety, this area of what's pleasant, what's comfortable, what we're drawn to. This is a system we share with every living organism. And we differentiate between the two by preference, by sensory preference. So again, let's just dip into that felt sense. Check in with how you sense this image. And then this image. And just see if there's any difference. We'll go back. And this is going to be very individual. You might be allergic to foxgloves, or you might have grown up in a power plant. It's going to vary, right? But generally, there's a preference towards what helps us connect with aliveness. However, cults and coercive relationships really mess with our capacity to make this discernment. And I'm sure you've all heard, and many of you experienced, when we leave a cult, things have been so controlled, you don't even know what you like as far as what to eat or what to wear. The decision-making process can be really, really difficult. So when you think of danger and how that gets messed with, if I were a whiz at PowerPoint, I would make these things all sort of squish around and mess up, because that's what happens. So in a cult, for example, if you are sensing, I don't like this, like in my cult, there were times I really didn't like what the guru was saying. He was kind of nasty. And I would have that feeling of, oh, no, don't like that. And of course, I would be talked out of it by the peer pressure and talk myself out of it. Oh, I must be a bad disciple, right? And then exactly the same thing happens on the safety side. You've got love bombing. Oh, the safety is here only with this group. The belonging is here. You miss those people outside that you're related to, but they're the enemy. So the system gets really, really messed with. But the good news is it's still there, or still here within us. So somatic psychotherapy can help us to access that inner guidance. And I want to say, too, that the learning how that manipulation's taken place, I think really happens very well in educational approaches and in cognitive approaches. And I think they're a very important part of cult recovery. So I want to give them a shout out, and want to make sure that those of us who are in love with somatic psychotherapy don't sort of get on the bandwagon and say, oh, this is better than that, because that's what we used to accuse, the cognitive therapists of. And we need it all, folks. We're body and mind and complex and unique, and we need to find what works for ourselves and for our individual clients. So if you're a client seeking a therapist, trust what feels right. Who feels right? Because that's the beginning of regaining confidence in your own preference and discernment. So I suggest that all ethical psychotherapy is grounded in client empowerment. But also it's the opposite of what happens in the cultic environment, where there's so much quasi-therapy. And in my cult, we had encounter groups that were naked. We could talk a lot about that. And when you came through a catharsis, there was a 6-foot photo of the guru. And so I think of imprinting, little Gosling seeing that at that moment of vulnerability. And also in the troubled teen industry, it's so obvious. They use these horrendous behavioral techniques to just break people down with this message of you're worthless. So empowerment is the opposite. And it's important to mention this, I think, because so many of the people we work with, if they're coming out of clients, have had that sort of experience and other ways of being abused physically and so on. So it's important to remember that this attention to the body that comes up with somatic approaches can be triggering. And the body is the repository of these memories. And in trauma, dissociation is a very important part of our survival mechanism, and something I find vital to work with. And Peter Levine, who created the somatic experiencing approach, is credited with coming up with freeze that we now all talk about, fight, flight, and freeze. So it's not something to be avoided, but it's something to know that when someone's really shut down and can't connect with their physical sensation, it doesn't mean that they're not feeling anything. It means that they're feeling so much, right? And the body can feel just very dangerous place. So a well-meaning therapist saying, oh, where do you feel that in your body? Oh, could be very triggering. Or it could be a wonderful invitation to discovery and exploration. It depends on the agreement, the relationship, the trust, the consent, the skill, and the timing. So sometimes the best somatic intervention is to not do one. No, I think that's really important. If you're somatically reading someone's body and sensing, don't do it. But the same applies if you're the client. If someone's suggesting you get into sensation and doesn't feel right, no is the right answer. No, thank you. Trust yourself. So we're going to look at a few ways to help therapists be safe and effective when using a somatic approach. And the first one is attending to the power differential. And all of us in the helping healing profession, we're part of a system in general, or a system that's being perceived as a system as being an authority. And often, we don't feel that way necessarily, but that's how you're being perceived, a perception that's magnified by a client who's been abused by someone in a position of authority and in a system. So obviously, we do not want to replicate that. So how do you rebalance that power differential? I think it's a lot to do with just really trying to help a client feel comfortable and safe, and certainly comfortable asking questions. And that includes questions that are traditionally off limits in psychotherapy, like asking the therapist, what's your religious belief? What's your political belief? And we as therapists have been taught, that's a no-no, but I disagree with that. If I'm coming from a coercive environment, I want to be damn sure that my therapist is not part of that system. So I think the transparency from the helper healer's perspective can really help in balancing that power differential. But transparency includes, if you're uncomfortable answering that question, being transparent about that. Just being genuine and saying no for whatever your own personal reason is. That would be being transparent and modeling good boundaries. The opposite of what happened in the cult. So for the clients also to remember that they're in the position of having choice, something they may not be used to, and that some way or another, they're the customer, they're the paying person, and if they don't like who they're going to, they don't have to be there. And I say this understanding how very hard it is to find a therapist in the first place. But if you don't like them, it's not really going to work very well. So another suggestion is something I feel quite strongly about, is supporting resistance, supporting your client's resistance. So in cults, people are told that resistance is wrong. It obviously doesn't work in conformity, right? So in my cult, it was really a put down if someone said, "You're being so resistant, Swami or Ma." No, it meant you're not surrendering. So, who did that serve? So this is just not true. Your resistance is your body's innate response to danger. You're not liking something. You're feeling a no percolating somewhere. So if you're coming from a top-down cultic relationship, cultic abusive experience, and you're coming to therapy or coming for help, you should be really resistant, perhaps in the form of suspicion. Why should you trust this person you don't know? That's your self-protection. So as the therapist, it's really important to support that and reinforce your client's self-protection. You're not comfortable with me in this room? Well, that's fantastic. I'd be really worried about you if you were comfortable. We just met each other. You shouldn't be comfortable. And I got a great example of this from my friend last week who does the same somatic practice I do. She was telling me that she had this session and she was kind of late to session and she got there a little flustered and she said to her client, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was on my way in and a whole pile of books just fell on top of me." And her client said, "I really don't give a shit." And my friend said, "Oh, that must be so empowering to have said that. Could we take a moment and just say that together?" That cool? Yeah. So another thing is being alert for compliance. So cult survivors have been conditioned to override our own sensory information in order to be good cultists. And that's very likely going to be taken into the therapy session. We want to be good clients. And of course, we want to be good therapists. And we want everyone to like us in general. Cult folks are very nice people. But also, that's normal social conditioning. I mean, we wouldn't be able to be in this room without a great degree of that. So I think just normalizing that in itself is very helpful. And what we're doing in the somatic work is going underneath the social conditioning and attuning to what's happening there and really helping someone to become curious about that and explore it and discover it themselves, because this is a very educational model in a way, because you're helping the client, but you're really teaching them how to do it themselves. And I think the best way to do that is really the modeling and the eliciting of curiosity. So if someone says, when I say, do you want to do this exercise? I've got this great exercise. I just went to this conference, and they go, "Oh yeah." Just determining, "Oh, well, that was just my idea. What would you like to do? Is there something you'd prefer to do?" Reading where that yes is genuine and where it's coming from compliance is incredibly helpful. So also reinforcing spontaneity. So our living organism is, if it's being spontaneous and creative, that's the life force. That's what we want to reinforce. And so my first job as a therapist is creating the climate of safety in the room. And that means working with both nervous systems, mine and the client's. So I'm looking at my own nervous system activation, and if I find I'm doing something like this, which is inherently self-soothing, I would draw attention to myself so I actually get the benefit of it and let myself take a breath. So I'm helping, to create this climate of safety and then leaning in to the side of pleasure, because we all know how to feel distressed and endangered, because that physiological response is so automatic and built into us for protective reasons. But feeling good and moving more into parasympathetic is also totally within our capacity. And we want to cultivate that, not so that the nasty, distressed, painful stuff is ignored. That's there. People are not coming for help because they feel so great. Well, on some days they do, and that's really nice, but not in general. So you want to be able to touch in when someone is in the distress. You want to touch in so that it's effective, and so the client can come out of that and not get overwhelmed. And a big tool for doing that is building up the resource of how to connect with the pleasure and the comfort and safety. And it's so counterintuitive, because you go to therapy like, please, I want to get fixed, take away this pain. And it's like, well, let's see if I can, without losing the client, without thinking I'm ignoring their pain, we will definitely attend to the pain, but work on building up the comfort and safety so that they can get out of themselves and not be overwhelmed. And then they have the experience of competence, of, oh, I shifted my state. That feels fantastic. And this can be done very subtly. Like if I have a client, I had one the other day who was sort of sitting on the edge of a chair and staring rigidly at me, and it was telehealth, so it's very common. You'd think you're supposed to look at this tiny little screen. And I invited her to just explore what felt comfortable in moving her chair around. She was on a swivel chair, and she moved around and suddenly saw this view out her window, and her shoulders just sank. And then I reinforced that by saying, well, that looks like that's a really nice thing to look at, better than the screen. Reinforcing it with joining, which is the best social connections, the best reinforcement we can provide. So the client had followed what felt good, not in a cognitive way, but in a body way. So let's do a quick exercise on this if you feel to. And that involves just, once again, thinking into your seat and maybe having a breath or two. And then I'm going to invite you to do something, but don't do it just yet. Right now, just let your eyes be lowered or even closed. Take a moment. That's right. And then the suggestion I'm going to make is that when you raise your eyes, you try and do it without being in the driver's seat. So the question is, where do your eyes want to go? If you weren't telling them what they should look at, let's just see what they would like. So when you're ready, let your eyes do some exploring and see if there's anything they're drawn to. And if it's something you can look at for a moment or two, enjoy. If not, move on to the next thing. And just take a moment connecting with your eyes, finding some pleasure. They may not even want to open at all. So if you are able to find something pleasant to look at, hang out with that for a moment, and then just see if you're having any physiological response in relationship to what you're looking at. How do you know? How does your body know that you're actually enjoying that? How do you know you like it? And take a moment there. And then as you come back, see if you're in any different state than before you did that. Give me a nod or a shake. Some little tiny shifts maybe. So I wanted to share that exercise with you because I love it. It's called orientation. It's a somatic experiencing exercise, and it's about orienting to the environment through the senses. And it's a fabulous exercise because we always have an environment. And I invited you to do it through your eyes, but you could do it through touch or smell or any of the other senses. And if we're looking at preferences, there's always something that's better than something else. And if everything sucks, what sucks less? I've done this in gray prison environments, and what it does is gets us out of our heads if we can actually connect in a sensory way, it's a felt sense externally to be in relationship with something. And it's a huge difference. When someone, we did it in a very rushed way. I usually would take much longer. But if someone's looking around, they go, oh yeah, that picture, that reminds me of my grandmother's picture that was on the wall. But they're not in their felt sense. They're still sort of in their heads. But if they suddenly go, oh, I love that blue, then you go, no, bingo. And then what I did was I invited, if you could connect with that, loving the blue, to hang out with, well, what's going on in you? That's reinforcing. So we're reinforcing a neuronal pathway to pleasure. And it's a very useful exercise for getting people out of anxiety and into just being more present. So, healthy pleasure. So the point I'm trying to make is when we first enter the body, let's do it through pleasure, right? And healthy pleasure is our aliveness, and it's our birthright, and it's a path forwards, and it's something that cults have co-opted. They've said, all the pleasure is over here, the love is here, or in the afterlife through us, and some groups criminalize pleasure. Right? So pleasure is a pathway for finding the way back to trusting in life. And when we're safe and we've built that capacity for pleasure, then it's time to start processing the bad stuff. So I want to take, that could happen in half an hour. I mean, doesn't necessarily take years. There were some people that might. So merci to our bodies for getting us here after all they've been through. I wanted to give them a moment of appreciation because here we are in whatever state we're in right now, being present with ourselves, with one another. This is where we want to be. And a client of mine put it this way: I did all this work to try and fix myself, only to find that I was never broken. Music to my ears, that was. So thank you for coming. And I wanted this massive QR code is to my website. And if you sign up on my website, I'll send you a very occasional newsletter. But I will also send you 10 tips for cult recovery, which people have found quite useful. So I would love for you to do that. My email and all my social medias contacts is through that. So on the tables, I've put the bookmark. This is the publisher created this lovely bookmark. And so there's pre-order for the book, but you won't get it till next year. So I want you to have fair warning. So hold on to that bookmark. And then you have the card, which has my contact information and QR code on. Designed, this is the cover of the book, designed by this lovely young woman from Toronto. And I'm so thrilled with it because I wanted to really show the appeal of the cult. Plus little sinister stuff creeping in there. Right, so we actually have 5 minutes for questions. Wow!